It wasn't a fight that ended my marriage. There were no slammed doors, no broken glasses, no screaming matches at 2 a.m. It ended quietly. It was the way Marlene poured herself a second cup of coffee one morning, barely looking at me, while my whole world was falling apart in slow motion. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It's not always loud. Sometimes, it's a whisper you almost miss, unless you're paying very close attention. My name's Colton. I'm not the hero of some romance novel. I don't have a tragic backstory or an inspiring comeback. I'm just an ordinary man who still believed that loyalty meant something. Marlene and I were married for 7 years. We lived in a small brick house on the edge of Glendale, Arizona. We weren't rich, but we had a life that felt real. Barbecues with the neighbors, Sunday markets, late-night crime shows. Or at least, that's what I thought. Lately, Marlene had started dressing up just to go to the grocery store. She laughed too hard at texts she wouldn't let me see. She came home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. You don't need to be a detective to see the signs, even when every part of you wishes you didn't. Still, I stayed quiet. I watched. I waited. Not because I was scared, but because I refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me break. Then one Sunday morning, just after sunrise, she sat across from me at the kitchen table. She stirred her coffee slowly, barely looking up. Without meeting my eyes, she said, "I've had enough, Colt. I'm done." I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask why. I leaned back in my chair, feeling lighter than I had in months, and said with a soft smile, "Finally." She blinked, surprised, like she expected me to fall apart. Maybe she wanted tears, yelling, bargaining. But I gave her none of that. That afternoon, she packed a suitcase and left. I didn't chase her. I didn't call her. I didn't even lock the door after she left. Because my next move wasn't about keeping her. It was about reclaiming the life she tried to steal from me. And trust me, when Marlene walked into my new home a month later, she wasn't ready for what she saw. The night she left, the house felt too big for just me. The silence echoed. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But then I opened the kitchen drawer, the one she thought was her little secret, and found what I had suspected. A burner phone. Cheap. Disposable. Filled with texts to Brent. Messages about our new life together. Photos of motel rooms. Plans to use the money from the house sale. She thought we'd finalize it together. But she'd forgotten one thing. The house was still in my name only. Letting her go wasn't a mistake. It was survival. Over the next week, I carefully dismantled the life we built. I sold the house. Quietly. I moved into a sleek condo on the other side of town. No memories on the walls. No history in the air. A clean start. But I wasn't finished. I knew Marlene would come crawling back. When Brent got tired of playing provider. When the fun of sneaking around turned into boredom. When bills piled up and she remembered what stability used to feel like. While I rebuilt my life, I also prepared for her return. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd drifted from. Business contacts. Even an old flame, Jessica. Jessica wasn't just some rebound. She was someone I had foolishly pushed away years ago, long before Marlene ever came into the picture. Jessica had recently moved back to town, newly divorced and thriving. When we met for coffee, it felt like no time had passed. She laughed at my jokes without forcing it. She listened without judging. She saw me, the real me, not the version Marlene had spent years tearing down. By the time Marlene's perfect world started to crumble, and believe me, it did, I was already standing on solid ground. The first sign of her desperation came in a text. "Colt, we need to talk." I didn't respond. 2 days later, a missed call. Then 3. Then 10. I didn't pick up once. I wanted her to feel the same silence she had fed me for years. That heavy, hollow kind of silence, the kind that echoes louder than any shouting match ever could. And just like I predicted, she showed up at my new place one Friday evening, uninvited. She didn't look anything like the polished woman who once used to toss her hair and fake a smile. This time, she looked tired. Worn out. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes were frantic. She hadn't expected me to move on so fast, Or maybe she just believed I'd still be sitting in some dark living room, crying over what we lost. But when she opened the door, without knocking, her jaw nearly hit the floor. Sitting at my dining table was Jessica. Beautiful, confident, completely at home. Laughing with my friends, sipping wine, wearing one of my old t-shirts like she had always belonged. Marlene froze in the doorway. It hit her all at once. She wasn't the center of my world anymore. She wasn't even a guest star. She was a background character in a story that no longer needed her. And I hadn't even said a word yet. She stood there for what felt like forever, frozen like a statue. Her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. The weight of her choices, the weight of her pride, it all crashed down in that moment. It was almost cinematic. Like the universe paused just long enough to let her fully grasp how little she mattered now. Jessica looked up from her wine glass, flashed Marlene a polite, almost dismissive smile, then turned back to the conversation, leaving Marlene standing awkwardly at the threshold. Uninvited, unwelcome, irrelevant. I leaned casually against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, calm as ever. I didn't move. I didn't greet her. I let her sit in that same uncomfortable silence she had once used against me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very silence she had weaponized had now become her punishment. Finally, she managed to say, "Colton, can we talk?" I raised an eyebrow, pretending to think. Talk about what, exactly? My voice was flat, indifferent. She glanced nervously at the others, a few old friends she used to mock for not being ambitious enough. Now they were laughing, thriving, sitting at my table like a wall she couldn't climb. I need a minute. Alone, she said, her voice cracking, desperation creeping in. Her eyes flicked back to Jessica, who remained perfectly relaxed, sipping her wine like she hadn't just watched a slow-motion car crash. I shrugged. Say whatever you need to say right here. These people, they're my family now. They can hear it too. That hit her harder than any insult ever could. She realized then that she wasn't special anymore. She wasn't protected by the privacy or loyalty she had once taken for granted. I wasn't shielding her from the consequences anymore. She'd have to face the wreckage she caused, publicly. Her voice shook as she said, "I made a mistake." I smirked. "Which one? You'll have to be more specific." She flinched as the group exchanged amused glances. Jessica leaned over and whispered something to my friend Seth, who chuckled. It wasn't cruel. It was justice. The universe, finally balancing the scales. Marlene stepped inside and shut the door behind her, maybe hoping it would somehow close the gap, seal the wound, bring things back to how they were. She took a slow, unsure step toward me. "Brent, he's not who I thought he was," she said, lowering her voice like that would earn her sympathy. "Yeah," I said casually. "They rarely are." Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't move me. I remembered every night I cried in silence while she was out, working late. Every cold shoulder. Every excuse. Every moment I wondered why I wasn't enough. Those memories didn't break me. They built armor. They made me immune to whatever act she thought she was performing now. "I want to come back," she whispered. I laughed, a real, honest laugh. Not from bitterness. From disbelief. "You thought you could just walk back into my life after you set it on fire?" She opened her mouth again, but I raised a hand to stop her. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free. "Marlene, you made your choice," I said. "And so did I." I walked back to the dining table, sat down beside Jessica, and picked up my glass of wine. Marlene just stood there, helpless and lost, watching the life she once ruled carry on without her. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one who lost everything. She did. She didn't leave right away. She lingered near the door like she believed if she stood still long enough, time might rewind. But reality doesn't bend for regret. She was a ghost at her own funeral, watching the life she abandoned thrive without her. She wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, trying to summon the version of herself that used to own every room she entered. But whatever power she once had over me was gone. "Colton, please," she said again, voice cracking. "We can fix this." Jessica glanced at her, gave her a look that said everything. "You're too late." I could have humiliated her. I could have thrown every receipt, every message, every hotel booking in her face. But I didn't need to. She knew. She knew I knew. And she knew I wasn't the man who would fight for scraps anymore. Instead, I stood slowly, walked over, and handed her a plain white envelope. No words. Just a gesture. Her hands shook as she took it. Her eyes searched mine for any trace of forgiveness. There was none. She tore it open right there, desperate for some thread of hope. But when she saw the papers inside, her face drained of color. Divorce papers. Not just any papers. Ironclad, airtight, unforgiving. "You already signed everything months ago," I said calmly. "You just didn't read the fine print." She staggered a step backward, clutching the envelope like it burned. "What do you mean?" I shrugged. "Remember when you rushed me to sign those refinancing documents? Said it was for our future. You signed too. You just didn't read them either." My friends at the table watched silently, not surprised, they already knew. But seeing it happen, that was a different kind of satisfaction. "You tricked me," she whispered. "No," I replied. "You tricked yourself." Her mouth opened and closed. She wanted to argue, to blame, to scream. But she couldn't. Because deep down, she knew, she gambled and lost. And the house always wins when you bet with lies. Jessica stepped beside me, sliding her hand into mine as naturally as if it had always belonged there. That one gesture crushed the last shard of hope Marlene had left. It wasn't just that I had moved on. It was that I had upgraded, emotionally, socially, financially. Marlene looked around the room one last time, hoping for pity, for sympathy, for something. But all she found was indifference. She wasn't the victim. She was the architect of her own downfall. Without another word, she turned and fled into the night, slamming the door behind her. A final punctuation mark on a chapter she no longer had any say in. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. It was freedom. And it was only the beginning. But, of course, Marlene wasn't done. 2 days later, she showed up again. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought Brent. Or what was left of him. A man who once thought he'd stolen my wife, and my life, now looked like a shadow of himself. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes sunken, and the swagger he once wore like a badge was long gone. I heard the knock just as Jessica and I were setting up a quiet dinner. A small celebration. Good friends. Good food. A bottle of champagne. Life was good. I wasn't about to let Marlene and her sad excuse for a partner ruin that. When I opened the door, Marlene's posture screamed defiance. But her eyes betrayed her. She was drowning. Brent stood behind her, shifting awkwardly, already regretting coming here. I didn't say a word. I leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed, and waited. "Colton," she said, voice syrupy and fake. "Can we come in?" I glanced at Brent. "Didn't you two have a whole new life planned?" Brent cleared his throat. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered the messages. The motel receipts. The smug photos. "Colton, please," she pushed. "We have nowhere to go. Brent lost his job. Our lease fell through. We need a place to stay. Just until we get back on our feet." That was it. That was her grand plan. After tossing me aside for what she thought was an upgrade, she came crawling back, not for love, not for regret, but for a warm bed and a hot meal. I nearly laughed. "You're standing on the wrong porch, Marlene." Brent stepped forward, trying to act tough. "Look, man. We made mistakes. But you don't have to be petty about it." I tilted my head. "Petty? You think refusing to house the people who betrayed me is petty?" Marlene reached out, like she might touch my arm. But I stepped back. That small rejection broke her more than any speech I could have given. "You both made your choices," I said. "Now live with them." "And now you get to live with those choices," I said coldly. "Together." Jessica came up behind me then, resting her hand gently on my back, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. I saw the flicker in Marlene's eyes. Jealousy. Not just because I had moved on. Because I had upgraded. "You should leave," I said, voice firm. She opened her mouth to argue, but Brent had already turned away, muttering something under his breath. Without a word, he grabbed her arm and started pulling her down the porch steps. She resisted for a moment, looking back at me with pleading eyes. But I just stood there, silent, unmoving. For the second time, she disappeared into the night. But this time, there was no storming out, no defiance, no grand exit. Just two broken people who gambled everything, and ended up with nothing. I closed the door, locked it, then turned back to Jessica and my friends. The music started up again. Glasses clinked in celebration. And the world moved forward, without Marlene in it, exactly the way it was supposed to. The days rolled by quickly after that second encounter. I didn't wonder where Marlene had gone, or whether Brent had finally realized he'd hitched himself to a sinking ship. I genuinely didn't care. I was too busy living the life she thought she had stolen. Only better. Jessica and I started building something real. Something untouched by betrayal. Weekends turned into adventures, not arguments. Dinners were full of laughter. One afternoon, as Jessica and I were setting up for a small housewarming party. New condo, new life, new beginnings, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity won. It was Marlene's mother. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since before everything unraveled. She was frantic. Her words tangled in sobs. It took a moment to understand her. But then it landed. Marlene was in trouble. Brent had left, unsurprisingly. The second she became a burden instead of an upgrade, he bailed. No money. No friends. No place to stay. She was couch-surfing, borrowing, begging. Now she was back at her mother's kitchen table, broken in every way imaginable, and asking for me. I stood there with the phone to my ear, and felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not pity. Nothing. Her mother begged me to come. To talk to her. To help put her back together. I almost laughed. Put her back together? She shattered herself. No one else. Every lie. Every betrayal. Every smug choice. She was the arsonist, not the victim. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "But that's not my job anymore." One evening, standing beneath a wide Arizona sky painted gold and violet, I slipped a simple ring onto Jessica's finger. No elaborate speeches. No promises I couldn't keep. Just a quiet vow whispered between two people who had both known loss, and chose each other anyway. When she said yes, it wasn't just a new chapter. It was a new book. One where the past was just a closed door, and the future stretched wide and beautiful. Marlene. She became just a faded memory. A lesson I had to learn the hard way. Not every loss is a tragedy. Sometimes it clears space for something better to grow. And standing there, hand in hand with the woman who truly saw me, I realized. I didn't just survive betrayal. I built a life it could never touch. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't just happy. I was free.